Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Crossover Deep Dive. Today, I have a wonderful guest. I have a composer and guitarist, multi-instrumentalist, I think. We're going to discuss more about that with Esbe. So welcome, Esbe.
Hello, nice to meet you.
It is so lovely to meet you. I've been listening to your new album, Mountaineers, which we'll talk about in a bit. So appreciate you being on.
Thank you. It's lovely to be here.
So what I always like to do is go to the beginning and see how your journey started. So was music something you heard all around, or did you kind of discover it on your own? How did that begin for you, Esbe?
Both my parents enjoyed music. In fact, my grandfather on my mother's side was a composer and conductor, although he sadly died before I was even born, so I didn't know him. But I was brought up with music and began singing at a very early age. I think when I was still like a baby, my parents would come up when I was in bed and say, "You've got to go to sleep now," because I'd be singing. So yes, I started, sort of quite organically from a young age.
And when did you start pursuing it, like taking lessons and realizing that it was something a bit more special than the average child that loves to sing?
I began playing the guitar. In fact, my best friend at school was playing, and not to be outdone, I asked if I could play as well. And that was in lunch times at school with a group, a group class. And the teacher offered to teach me privately, sort of more formally. So I had lessons with him for a couple of years. And then in the school assembly, they read out if anybody wanted to apply to one of the music colleges, Royal Academy of Music in London, to do Saturday mornings. And I applied and got in. And so I then started learning what I would say is properly, from a proper classical teacher.
Wow. So you had a good ear to start, and you must have been quite good to get into the Royal Academy of Music. What was that experience like? Because it sounds like you were was that still in primary school, or was that what we'd call
that was just into secondary school. So that was in the UK starting age. Well, I was 13, I think, 12, 13 then. So it was just in the first year of secondary school.
Wow. And I wanted to go there. I remember being like, that's an amazing school. So what was that like going at a young age, being part of this program? You said on Saturdays and getting that instruction in classical, I guess, for the first time.
It was lovely because my school was not particularly musical. So I didn't really have any friends, maybe one or two friends that learned an instrument. So suddenly you're kind of with other young people who are learning and who are much better than me. I mean, they some of them were really brilliant. And so you find that when you're talking about composers and classical music, they understand, because they're doing the same thing.
And it does really push you to be better when you're in that atmosphere of people that are doing incredible things as well.
It does, yes. And being a guitarist, the guitar, probably less so now, but it was still viewed as being a bit of an outlier as an instrument. So it's not like being a violinist or a pianist. In fact, I did violin in second study because you have to do two instruments. So certainly guitarists, I think, often feel that they have to prove themselves even more to be taken seriously.
Can you tell us a little bit? I'll give background. What I always try and do on this show is break down a little bit if someone's talking about a voice technique or something for the average listener who may not know. So can you share a little bit about, I feel like guitar, again, as you said, it's played so often in popular music. Could you share a little bit of the techniques that make it different in classical music to popular music?
The discipline. So for your right hand, say, you are much more disciplined and using all your fingers in a very specific way. The music is more complicated. Obviously, you're reading music as opposed to perhaps reading chord charts and guitar tabs. So you're learning in the same way that other instrumentalists are and playing music by the same composers. often in arrangements, because the guitar really only began to develop its repertoire sort of in the 18th century, 19th century, and even then it was quite small. So we play a lot of Bach transcriptions and 20th century music, and now 21st century music, but 20th century music. And people like Julian Bream and John Williams, who were sort of mid-20th century and later players, were very instrumental in developing the repertoire and commissioning composers to write for the guitar.
Would another difference be that classical guitar is more often played acoustic? Or at least the way
it is. Okay. Yes, it's all acoustic. It's all acoustic. It's quite a specific instrument in its construction compared to, say, the steel string, you know, which has a much larger body. Obviously, it's got steel strings as opposed to nylon strings. It's not so dynamic in the same way. There are ways of amping up a classical guitar, but generally you're taught to project as much as the instrument can, and so it is even in orchestral settings. You know, if you're for concerto, you're playing it completely acoustically, perhaps with an external mic, but yeah, it is always acoustic.
And you mentioned Julian Bream. So that was something, I don't know if that happened during the time at the college or right after. So you actually got a prize for your guitar playing. So tell us about that, like what it meant to have that recognition for a young artist.
Well, he was in the same cohort as my teacher, called Hector Quine, who is no longer with us, as the same with Julian Bream. And so they were friends. And so Hector arranged for Julian Bream to come in once a year to adjudicate the prize in his name, and he would set, 4 pieces, a sort of small performance. And it was quite daunting, you know, because you're playing to the person who you're aspiring to be, and he would judge it. And then luckily I won one of the years, and I remember he actually signed the certificate while I was in the room with him, and you know, which was quite nice to, you know, I still remember him doing his own signature on the certificate for me.
Now, you mentioned, you know, the different repertoire, and I was looking about you and about your influences, and it said you quite enjoy early music. So I'm curious if it's similarities between the guitar and the lute, maybe. Is that something that draws you to that repertoire?
Yes, I mean, I love playing early music on the guitar, particularly Dowland and Bach as a sort of slightly later composer. But and I sang Caccini songs, and I had a duo with another guitarist who is also a lutenist, an arch lute player. So we would do a mix of arrangements of repertoire and standard guitar repertoire for 2 guitars, like pieces by Defying and Granados, and we also did lute songs. So we would break the program up, and I would sing some Purcell and some early music.
So you've mentioned obviously guitar, you sing, you play violin. Is there any other instrument that you do, Esbe? Because I know you also compose and you arrange, but are those your 3 mains that you focus on?
I don't play the violin anymore, no. That would be an awful experience if I tried to play it. So I'm really guitar, and obviously you use a piano keyboard to program. So, you know, okay, if I'm producing, but I'm not a pianist. I didn't actually do piano as a second study. So I'm primarily a guitarist and a vocalist.
And tell us a little bit about your voice, because I feel like you have this lovely, beautiful voice. The recordings I've heard haven't used much of the classical side, but I'd love to hear those as well. So tell us a little bit about your style and how that's developed as a vocalist, because I feel like that's such a personal thing.
Well, as you know, as a singer, yes, it is very personal. I didn't really, although I changed to voice as a second study at the Academy in my last year.
Okay.
And to be honest, it was because I couldn't do two instruments to the same level, because you're supposed to do like 4 or 5 hours practice a day. And so I just couldn't manage that on guitar and violin.
Yeah.
And with the voice, you don't have to do quite such a long amount, such a great amount of practice each day.
Yeah.
But I was singing, but it didn't feel like it was a particularly formal set of tuition at the Academy. I don't quite know why. Maybe it's because I only did it for a year. But I just started singing, and I enjoyed singing in different styles. So, and I worked with some Indian musicians and tried sort of singing, ragas and in that style, and Middle Eastern and Eastern European. I've done a couple of tracks where I've multi-layered my voice with typical kind of Eastern European harmonies, like the Bach's vulgaris. So I just like exploring different ways of using the voice.
And for that, like you mentioned more, I think Egyptian, I think I read that you'd gone to Egypt and that inspired you. Vocally, does that just need a lot of freedom to be able to move those turns and stuff? How would you describe that to someone that's never sung that before?
It's difficult because I've not studied with anybody. So
yeah,
what I do is kind of, it just feels, I suppose I'm just copying intuitively a bit, and
yeah,
I don't really think about it too much.
That's fair. That's totally fair. But let's talk about these influences then, because you mentioned Eastern European, you mentioned, all these different places. How has world music now come in and influenced that classical, which I'm sure, is a bit more strict, and now you're creating music, you've graduated, you're creating your own music. So how are those two worlds fusing for you?
Again, I guess I just fancy doing something. Each album is a little bit different.
Yeah.
I kind of feel that I'm going to write in a particular style, always I think about the production, how I'm going to produce and what the arrangements will be, and that sort of dictates what I try. So I did an album called Saqqara, which is named after the oldest, well, certainly one of the oldest pyramids in Egypt. And I was inspired from a holiday, and so I don't know. I just kind of try and absorb a little bit what I hear, and use some of the scales, and just get into the mood of what it is, and hopefully it reflects it.
So starting off with a theme, and then you immerse yourself in the culture. And then do you find, like, when you're writing, it's more melody inspired, it's more rhythm inspired, or maybe it's just the atmosphere you're trying to capture in general?
It's very rarely rhythmic in terms of its initiation. Okay. Yeah. I'm not a percussionist, obviously, and I'm not particularly good at programming complicated percussion. It ends up being quite random, what I try. But I love interesting chord progressions. But usually the two things kind of arrive at the same time, the melody and I will usually write either with the guitar or with the keyboard, often just with the keyboard. And then make notes, because I've got terrible memory. So I kind of, if I find a phrase,
Me too,
I quickly write it down, because I've forgotten it if I carry on.
do you feel like when you write a song, it's pretty closely formed, or it goes through several iterations before it becomes the end product that people hear?
If it gets finished, it gets recorded. So I don't, if I kind of work through something, I think I've probably only ever abandoned 1 or 2 songs. You know,
Okay.
I kind of make them work, or they flow usually quite quickly. But I have gaps between recording and writing, so I think I'm always eager to kind of get on with the next thing, because I haven't actually written anything for a few months.
And you hold it to be part of that process. Okay. So one of the things that I've heard, and I've also read in reviews of you, is they talk about this multi-tracking, different layers of sound that you're using. So was that something you just kind of, you were exploring and you thought, oh, that sounds quite cool when I start doing these layers of my voice, or how did that come about?
One thing that the teacher that I had, my singing teacher at the academy, said that I only remembered it later, was that my voice was sort of quite clear and would track well. When I started recording, I always wanted to put backing vocals on, and then I experimented with turning myself into a choir, really, of just sort of tracking each part maybe 4 times, and then you sort of lose the individual quality of the voice. So it just started like that, and I did the same thing with the guitar on Mountain Airs, because I'm used to that way of working.
So tell us about, oh, sorry.
No.
About Mountain Airs, this is your 10th album. So what was the inspiration behind, this beautiful set of music you've created?
Oh, thank you. Well, I hadn't featured the guitar. I've used it a little bit on previous albums, but I wanted to do an album, and I did think it would be an instrumental album rather than having any vocal on it, that would showcase the guitar, and so it was a way of working. Yes, so those are the 2 singles, Mantiwaki and Passing Storm in Yosemite, and then Mountain Airs. So those were the the 3 little sort of visuals that I did, I just wanted to showcase what the guitar could do and how it could sound. Sometimes just having 2 guitars, so perhaps a melody and some arpeggiated or chordal accompaniment, or having proper multi-layers, where there'd be maybe 20 different parts, 25 different parts playing.
Oh. And did you visit each of these places, or maybe just, visit them through watching videos of it? Because they're named after different mountains, right? Like you just mentioned. So they're distinct, I'm sure, for each of those characteristics. So are you a big nature person? Were you out exploring them, or?
No, I love the outdoors and I love traveling. I must admit, I haven't been to each of them in person.
Yet.
But if I haven't been to the specifics, I've been to one next door.
Yes.
So, it was just trying to conjure up the mood, really. Particularly like the Japanese ones, sort of getting some pentatonic scales in, and a little bit of, the sort of buoyant simplicity of Japanese music, and then Passing the Storm in Yosemite. I just thought that would be interesting, with clouds coming and building the track up, so it was just to be, I was just inspired by those views, and just remembering what it's like to spend a morning climbing something, and then finally get to the top and enjoy the view.
That's the beautiful thing about music is, you know, a lot of us won't be able to go to each of these places, but we can travel there through your music, and you've done some lovely music videos that go along with them. I saw on your website, along with this album, you were talking about a condition called muscle-fold dysphonia, and how it affects musicians. So I'm not sure, is that something you're looking to raise awareness to, or was that just something on your personal level that you wanted to share around this album?
I am happy to kind of, yes, sort of, I think people are not aware of it. Focal dystonia can affect anyone. So musicians' focal dystonia obviously is brought on by playing an instrument. It tends to affect certain instruments more than others, and it's a neurological condition. So it's brought on by repetitive action, but not on a muscular or a joint level, where like something like tennis elbow. So it's more the communication from the brain to the fingers, and they think that sort of through that repetitive action or use of the brain pathway, the information for some reason just sort of gets clogged up, or you know, it doesn't sort of function. So things that you can do automatically that you've been doing, you know, since you were 11 or 12, suddenly they just don't happen, you know. And it's, I mean, I was lucky because I record, I'm singing, and I've got lots of other outlets. But for concert musicians who are only performing their chosen instrument, I mean, that is really difficult because you can't play anymore.
Yeah. I think it's important to talk about these things because we always hear the highlights of musicians, right? We always hear like, you know, everything's going great and then they're getting this gig, but these very real life events come in and change your story a little bit, change how you approach things. And like you said, with this album, it's so great though that you still have this outlet for doing things, but I'm sure it's changed how you think about playing and all of how you appreciate it as well. You know, Mountain Airs is just beautiful. So thank you for continuing on. And I think you are working on new projects as well, which is so exciting.
Yes, it's always something.
Yeah.
So I always kind of feel a bit weird if I haven't been recording for a while. I realise that I get a little bit sort of jittery. And then I think, well, why do I feel odd? And then I look back and think, oh yes, because I haven't written anything, or I've been in the studio for sort of 3 months. So I'm just coming to the end of another project, which is completely different, although it's multi-tracked, most of it, but multi-track vocals. So no more guitar for the moment. And it's a project with a chap called Bill Jackson, who is he's really creative art filmmaker. And we met just by chance and decided to create something together. So he has been doing videos for each of 9 songs. I've got the 9th one to finish. And we're planning to do some sort of video installation, you know, to show it, because obviously it's a multimedia project. So that's the next thing to be coming out. And I've also got an album that I wrote with another musician, which is film music. So that's also going to be coming out later in the year.
That's very exciting. So have you done a lot of soundtracks, Esbe, or is that something you would like to do, is maybe compose for soundtracks in the future? Because we haven't touched too much besides the compositions for your album. So is that something you want to do, is do more composition?
I would love to. I'm very kind of visual anyway. And so writing soundtracks or having tracks used that I've already written, as for films would be wonderful.
Especially the nature tracks. I feel like that could be so perfect for a documentary. Just an amazing soundtrack for that. We're going to do a couple of fun questions here. So if you could collaborate with any artist, either living or from the past, who would you like to collaborate with?
Oh my God, I'd always wanted to work with Jeff Beck, but not as a guitarist, because I can't play in the same way. But he was just such a brilliant musician. I'd have loved to have done something vocally, with him as a musician. So that's my first answer.
Perfect. Okay. Do you have a favorite kind of app or application or anything else you use as a musician that kind of helps with your creativity?
I don't think so. No, I mean, I use Logic to record on.
Logic. Okay.
Yes, yeah. So I'm a Logic user. So and I do explore different plugins. So a plugin is kind of like if you need a different reverb or a different EQ, more in the processing. I'm less reliant on the sounds that you get, with Logic. You get a bank of sounds. I use Spitfire audio for strings and orchestral sounds. But yeah, that's what I've been using for the last 4 or 5 years.
What is the most unusual place or thing that has inspired a song for you?
There's a song on. It's one of 2 songs that I've re-recorded, and I actually wrote it at Baker Street Station, waiting for the train actually to go to a studio. And I used to do. I was a sort of bit of session singing, so I was waiting to go to a session sort of mid-morning, so it wasn't too busy, and I was waiting at the very end of the platform, and it's an underground, semi-underground station, so it's actually the first, I think it's one of the first London stations that had the tube network going into it, but it's not below ground as such. And I just remember standing there and I just started singing. So I thought, right, okay, and that became a song, and that's on the next album.
Awesome. Do you have a dream venue to perform in that you haven't performed in yet?
Well, I haven't performed in many places, so I don't know. I mean, I was like the Purcell Room in London on the South Bank as a classical venue, but no, I mean, singing outdoors is lovely. I used to sing outdoors as a child, because you have your natural acoustics then. So
very calming setting as well. The other thing, Esbe, I think we should talk about is, in addition to music, you are also a graphic artist and a designer. So when we just shared the Mountaineers, I'll bring it up again. This is artwork that you've done. Is that right?
That's right. Yes, I do. I'm kind of primarily kind of line led. So I'm not a painter. I'm kind of line drawings, and then I use color. So obviously these needed to be mountains. So they're actually based on actual mountains, and then I will sort of stylize them. So so I do all the artwork for the albums.
And you also have, as we mentioned, 10 albums. So here are some of those other artworks you've done. I guess having done 10 albums, like, do you have favorites? Can you choose between your catalog and say, you know, these are the ones that really I love, or they're all your children? It's hard to pick.
I guess you're always kind of most pleased with the most recent one.
Yes.
Because that's the one that you've learned, you know, you're drawing on your previous knowledge more from a recording point of view for me. But it's the one that you're focused on. So you know, I'm thinking of Mountaineers now. I'm pleased with the way that sounds. And then I'm sort of becoming happy with the one that I'm in the middle of at the moment.
That makes total sense, because you're so engrossed in that project that you're doing at that moment. So of course, we look forward to hear what's coming next for you. And we hope that the listeners will enjoy Mountain Airs as well. Esbe, one final question, just because, you know, this magazine is all about crossover music. So I feel like that term has evolved quite a bit since when I was a little girl, not even hearing classical crossover at that point. So I'm curious, you know, what does classical crossover mean to you and your music?
It's interesting because it's a sort of modern concept of crossover. And yet, if you talk to people that say that, oh no, I don't listen to classical music, you say, well, did you like the music that was in that film, you know, that you've just seen? Well, that was classical music.
Right.
You know, so it's sort of, it feels like it shouldn't really have a name, and we shouldn't have to say that it's crossover. It's just music. It's just music that's been created on a certain set of instruments and in a particular way. So yes, it's the hybrid nature of it, and it does encompass anything now, you know, which is great. But we should just think of it as music.
Music. I like that. Well, thank you again so much for being with us, Esbe, and everyone. We hope you will join us back here next time for another episode of the Crossover Deep Dive.
No, thank you very much. It's been lovely talking to you.
So lovely chatting with you, and come back when your new music is ready.